Thank you for coming to this session. We are talking about building the civil service of the future. And I'm joined by three perfect guests to discuss this. Gus O'Donnell, who, as most of you know, was head of the civil service for a number of years. Susan Acland-Hood, permanent secretary at the Department for Education, and Tamara Finkelstein, who was until recently permanent secretary of DEFRA. We're going to do it as an open Q&A with a series of questions. I'll talk to our three guests, and then we'll throw it open for questions. Let me start by saying, going back to where we began the day, for those of you who were here, Ravi and I both talked about the scale of the challenge that it feels like the country faces. Now, right or wrong, I think I would summarise the position as the public view, or the sense out there is one that feels pessimistic, and it feels like problems seem almost insoluble, that government, despite having a large majority, is finding it very tough to govern. And an extension of that, which takes us to the question of the civil service, I think, is that there's also a sense that the state writ large, even when policy is clear, finds it harder and harder to effect change quickly and effectively. Now, I think we know the situation is obviously more complex than that, but I would describe that as the current skeptic's view of the world. So that suggests there is a very big challenge facing us, and I think I'd like to start with that. What's your sense of the scale of the challenge? Is that a fair summary? What's your feeling about that perception? Gus, do you want to kick off?
Sure. I think you're right. There is a massive problem about trust, and the trust in politics and the trust in government to do things. There is a paradox there that we are at a stage where more than ever before people want government to do things, yet they don't trust government. Now there's a kind of, get your heads around that. Secondly, I think when people think about reforms to that, building the civil service of the future, I think the one thing we need to realise is the issue is how effective our state is. And there's three dimensions to that. One is MPs and ministers, the other is Parliament, and the third is the civil service. And we need to grapple with all three of those. So if you have a system where your ultimate decision maker has had no training whatsoever in making decisions, that's always going to be difficult, right? And so we need to understand, could we do something about that element of it? For example, training MPs about being ministers, for example, training them about the one thing we know they're going to have to do is understand decision making under uncertainty. So I think there's a lot to be done there. Parliament, I've just come from the House of Lords, oh my goodness. If you live this, you realise quite how dysfunctional our system of legislation is, and how time-consuming and how difficult all of that is. And then from the civil service, I think the challenges for the civil service are, first of all, dealing with all the things that I've said above and having to manage that. Secondly, I think there's some real issues which I think you might come on to in attracting and keeping the right people in the civil service. That relates to the remuneration package and other things which we might come on to. And there are some issues where we are facing a world where the public is used to services being provided at a certain level, and these are services they pay for, which, for example, you go onto your banking app and you can do all these wonderful things and all the rest of it, and there are lots more difficult issues about managing that within the civil service, particularly, I just take health. I always say, as the economist in me, if you run Tesco's, you try running something when you're not allowed to charge any prices. It's much harder, right? And it's very different, which is why businessmen find it so hard to be successful when they come into the civil service, because it's a different challenge. So I think there's a lot there. I could go on at length, but I think the two more relevant, more timely people should pass over.
Susan.
Thanks very much. I do think there's a sort of a challenge of hope, and I think we should reflect on that hard, because it's really difficult to do hard things if you believe they're impossible. I sort of hold in mind two things wise people I know have recently said. One was a wise person in the PermSec group, I won't name who said, the thing is the civil service is getting better, but the world is getting worse faster. That sounds like a joke, but I'm not sure it is. And I think we have to challenge ourselves to get better faster, to meet that kind of challenge. And we have to believe we can do it, because it's really important. And the second was a colleague who's an absolutely outstanding council leader, who was part of a conversation between senior public servants, who said, it's our duty to be optimistic and hopeful. It's a requirement on us. If we spend all of our time telling each other how hard it is and moaning and groaning, it's not going to get better. So we have to sit in the place, not unrealistic optimism, but we have to sit in a place where we hold the belief that we can make change and affect the future. And we have to bring other people into that place with us as well as we possibly can. But it does feel like it's hard. And I think there's also something about the balance between spending lots of our time kind of introspecting about our own mechanisms, when we know that the thing that is genuinely going to shift citizen perceptions is delivery. And a huge chunk of delivery is not that complicated. It's about being really clear about your goals, having excellent mechanisms to achieve them, and then being very persistent and determined and being prepared to pivot, alter and change when something's not working. And you can make it massively more complicated than that if you want to, but actually there's deep virtue in staying very simple.
Simplicity, yeah.
Yes.
Tamara, what's your sense?
So we'll start with pessimism and move to optimism. So I do think the challenge is incredibly urgent. I think the public is looking for higher living standards and better public services, and they look at government, which is all three of the elements that Gus talked about, and has absolutely no trust that it can be delivered. And I think it's very urgent, because I think there's a few years, as in this Parliament, I'm pretty sure that at the next election you might well have both the Conservatives and Reform on a platform of changing the civil service to have not being an impartial, independent, sort of civil service, and having a sort of political top tier, for example. So I think that the task is incredibly urgent to reform and change in order to do that delivery and for people to see that delivery. And the context, as Susan just said, is bad, as difficult and getting worse. But I do think it's a doable thing. But one of the critical things that is needed is an alignment between government and civil service to do this. I think the civil service lacks confidence, is in a bit of a defensive crouch that was built up at the end of the last government, and has looked as if there was a bit of a wish to kind of work together, and that has kind of dissipated a bit. And I think there has to be that working together, clear shared priorities, clear focus on delivery, and a range of things that I suspect we will talk about how we increase our capability, absolutely grapple with technology in the way that we need to deliver. So I think it's doable, but it requires that shared mission to do that together, and an optimism and kind of positivity about being able to do it. And then we can move from that rather pessimistic position to a more optimistic one.
And just to pick up the idea, I think it's worth discussing the relationship between the political leadership and the civil service. I think everybody's familiar with that there is one, and it's very, very important. But if we notice that I think the Prime Minister, in the context of the the tepid bath comments, which everybody will remember, but not the first politician in recent days to have a certain dynamic, which not necessarily entirely helpful, but the dynamic we're aware of. What is the relationship between that dynamic and also connecting it to his and other people's challenge that structural change is required? I mean, what does structural change mean in the context of that kind of challenge from the political leadership?
I would start by saying the Prime Ministers, when they say those sorts of things, have absolutely no idea the answer to that question. Right? When they talk about rewiring the state, they honestly don't know what they're, okay, so, how do you want to do this? What are you thinking about? Nothing. So you do need to realise as a civil servant that, and this sometimes people forget, it's an incredibly political job, right? You do have to understand the way in which politicians work, what matters to them, and how to think about, for example, on delivery, how to get them interested in delivery. It's every Prime Minister I've ever worked with is like, ooh, another foreign trip. Oh, this is good. They treat me really well. The foreign press ask me proper questions about policy. It's great. And I've left behind all those fights about, oh my God, the internal party fights, So you can understand why they get really attracted to doing foreign policy, and you have to drag them back to the domestic stuff. But I think when you're thinking about how to do structural change, I think it's important that you start from the civil service point of view of saying, look, we're not perfect, right? So one of the things when I was Cabinet Secretary, I think a lot of people in the room will remember, we did those capability reviews, we published them. And I am very, very clear that when I look at the civil service now, I think there is a consequence of having let the pay go ridiculously down, that we have got, the numbers have gone up quite dramatically, and we're in a situation where the diversity is going to change quite radically. So I do think there's issues for us, and one of the things I was really quite appalled by was in my day, I started a thing called the Civil Service People Survey. One of the things that the civil service, all of you probably, told me was that poor performance was a real problem and we didn't treat it properly because you were fed up with the poor performance not being dealt with. And that was true for a long time, and then suddenly we stopped asking the question. I mean, can you believe it? So, I mean, to me, it's like, let's face up to that fact. That's one of the structural things we need to get better at. So there's some internal things that we could definitely do, to do with pay, to do with performance, to have a higher quality, possibly lower quantity civil service. That would be my agenda. And I do think what you said about missions and delivery is really important, that we still underestimate the people who really understand about delivery. Great conversation with Amy about delivery in her department. It is a real challenge, particularly when you get people like me that get to the top never having done delivery, right? A policy wonk, okay? That is a real challenge, and you need the people that actually know. I mean, the fabulous things that have been done. You look at like passports, there's some great delivery stories out there, some great people doing great jobs, and we don't, but you look at what's happened now. We've got some missions which, let's face it, what you said was like clear outcomes. No, right? So the last sort of missions, no, they'll be ditched because they weren't clear outcomes. We need proper clear outcomes, a relatively smaller number, and then get on. And so the structure, the mission boards and all the rest of it, well, I can't find anyone that really thinks they worked.
Well, I'll have a fight with you on that, Gus.
Okay, that's good. So, but they are going to change it all. I mean, I don't know how they're going to change it. I wish they'd kind of, instead of saying they're going to abolish them, then said, actually, we're going to do this instead. But we've got the abolish, we haven't got the this instead yet. So I'm glad if you think there's a way we can make it. I hope there's a way we can make this work, because it's absolutely essential.
Do connect. I mean, I was going to come on to the missions in any case. So,
okay.
I mean, the mission delivery unit has already gone, hasn't it, as my understanding?
Yeah.
So we're already evolving.
We're definitely evolving. I mean, so I'll just say a couple of things. I mean, the first thing I was going to say is that the last thing you should do if you're in the bath is rewiring. Just a tip.
Best
if
joke
you're-
of the day. So.
Sorry, if you're considering it.
Very good.
So, from my point of view, I think, and I can speak most powerfully about the Opportunity Mission because it's the one we've been leading from the Department for Education. I think with any of these things, you have to decide whether you're going to lean into them and try and make them work, or whether you're going to sit there and kind of fold your arms and go, well, no, that's not how we normally... And we've really tried to lean massively into the Opportunity Mission and make it work. And we've done a whole set of things. So we have defined the goal. The goal is reducing intergenerational income inequality, and we have defined a set of sub-goals underneath it, including 75% of children reaching a good level of development in the early years and foundation stage. And we've then done a set of things that clearly point towards that goal. We've massively uplifted the early years pupil premium. We've announced the Family Hubs rollout. We published the Best Start in Life strategy. We did the childcare rollout this September. And if I had £1 for everybody who told me that was impossible, I wouldn't have a hole in my budget. We're building school-based nurseries. So we're doing a whole set of things that flow on from, and again, within the mission's bigger than the early years, but we said within this we're going to have a clear early priority and it's going to be the early years, and then we did a set of things that followed on from that. Now, they haven't actually abolished the missions. They've just said they're not going to steer them all from the Cabinet Office, which from my point of view is fine, because we were doing it anyway. So, I mean, you know, we're working really well with the Cabinet Office and everything, but I wasn't waiting for them or relying on them. And the thing that's been important about it has been trying to use whatever the structure or the shape is that is currently in vogue to do a set of good quality, sensible things and to bring other departments around them. And we're not going to abolish our mission board. We're going to keep it going. We're just going to run it from us. It's going to be a little bit harder to get other people to come to the meetings, I think. But I'm actually quite confident because we've got some momentum. And we're doing some things, and we can point to real concrete... it's back to delivery again, really. And again, my sort of starting point is central structures and shapes around these things can help you, they can catalyse. But if you sit and wait for somebody else, none of us will make the progress that we could make. So my sort of clarion call to everyone, you know, it's easy for me, I'm a perm sec, all of that, but I kind of have tried to live this through the whole of my civil service career. Like, if you can see a good thing that needs doing and figure out a way that that you can do it and find another person who's ready to do it with you, JFDI, like, just do it. And we need more of that, I think. We need more sense that we can just, you know, pick up the baton and go for it. And I kind of think my biggest job as a perm sec is to make it easier every day for the people who work for me to do more of that kind of stuff.
So let me start on the kind of tepid bath of managed decline. It was unbelievably damaging. Because there was a sense of a reset when the government came in, of a wish to build this kind of partnership. And you know how it is, in that kind of single assertion, which, because it had a very negative impact, was followed by I didn't quite mean that, which obviously no one kind of remembers. When someone from my team sent me a photo of a mug they had found at the tea point, which said sitting in a tepid bath of managed decline on it, right? Someone had actually gone and got themselves a mug saying it, because its impact was huge. And the reason it's a problem is not because we shouldn't be really clear there's huge amounts that the civil service needs to change, but it has to be a partnership with ministers so that we can do that together. And it looked as if that was going to happen, and then it sort of reversed. So I think it was very damaging, and I think rebuilding that is critical. A missions-based approach is fantastic because what you need is that clarity of outcome. And as a perm sec, for example, the growth one wasn't well enough defined, but I had been trying for some time in DEFRA to ensure that my department and my wider group, which includes the Environment Agency, Natural England, understood that actually we were about enabling growth. And I have a lot of people in that group who don't see that as their role, and understanding that actually you can drive growth while protecting the environment, and that is what they're there to do, massively shifts what you do, the way you approach our role in planning or whatever. So actually to then have that as a real apex target massively helped me to lead my leadership team and the organisation to sort of in that kind of direction. So very helpful to do. But you have to then consistently apply some sort of process for sort of for doing this work. And what I think wasn't working, and maybe it can work in whatever emerges, is that the mission boards were quite retro. They were sort of, seemed to me, you know, sort of sets of meetings and people kind of making sure they were getting ready their slide pack for the next meeting in 6 weeks' time. The opportunity one clearly was somewhat different, and you could see that actually from outside. But much too little of bringing in outside views and outside experts. And one of the things that we have to change as a civil service is our confidence in enabling externally people, both understanding citizens much better, some, you know, citizens' assemblies, the other ways in which we can understand citizens, and bringing in outside expertise, because we are not good at it. And the mission board, from my perspective, were not doing that effectively. So there were ranges of ways in which it was the right thing, and to have those clear outcomes really works, but it wasn't being done in the best way possible. One of the things I was really keen to see was to do it slightly different for every mission. So find different ways. We don't know the best way to do this. So actually do it differently for each of the missions, and have somebody on each of the teams who is has a bit of a social anthropology background, whose only job is to watch how are you doing it, and actually learn what works best. Is it, you know, bring everyone in a team in a war room, and that's the way you know, what are the different ways in which we could operate, how you work between external people, you know, the politicians and the civil servants. Try different ways, learn, and then do that, use that, apply that in future. So there are ways in which we could make it better, but maybe that would be what the reset's about.
I'd like to move to, so let's get back to building the civil service of the future. I think there's 3 areas I'd like to cover. One is skills, which I'll kick off in a moment, and then onto the pay issue, which I think is interesting, pay and staff overall. And then third, we should definitely get to AI, technology, and those sorts of issues. I mean, on the first, on skills, I mean, my observation from the outside, and this may be unfair, is that it feels to me like the challenge of the civil, one of the challenges, is that the generalist tradition of the civil service feels to me ever more at odds with the modern world. And I say that because, you know, I've worked a lot alongside the civil service, close to it when I was in number 10, but a huge amount of the private sector as well. And in the private sector, it is, after a certain point, it's pretty rare to hire people without deep domain knowledge. And it becomes ever less common. And in fact, the typical story in the private sector is if you hire without domain knowledge, you're likely to fail. You're likely to get a failure. And, you know, I think back to my own experience doing, for example, a multi-billion-pound spectrum auction. And I turned up, and, you know, incredibly complicated stuff, billions of pounds at stake, and I'm dealing with a couple of senior civil servants, but who came from departments where they had no knowledge of, they scarcely knew what the spectrum was for, because they just started. So what's the, you know, and one could apply the same question about sort of data analytics expertise, or you know the point. Have we got the balance right, and how does that need to change, or does it need to change in the future?
So first and foremost, it comes back to my first point, that this should be about building the state of the future. So, yeah, deep domain experience. So, Secretary of State for Defence, Chancellor, you know, like, come on, I could go on forever. There is no domain experience, right? You would not run a private sector company with someone and then shift them after a year. I mean, so that, yeah, they're just getting to know this department. God, that's terrible, isn't it? They might have some knowledge. Let's move them somewhere else. I mean, you know, so you've got that, right?
It's worse amongst the political domain, really.
Oh,
much worse.
Yeah, because there's no training programs, no professionalisation. There's no, so you've got that, which in a sense means that you need a lot more domain expertise in the civil service. And I completely agree with that. I was I came into civil service late as an academic economist coming into the Treasury. I could not believe that monetary policy, there was a key group, and they were classicists. Right? And there was a group called, the Treasury was really good at names. It was MG1 and MG2. MG1 was the classicists who wrote the advice to the Chancellor, who obviously knew a lot about economics. And MG2 was a bunch of nerdy economists like me who do some modelling and work out, and oh my God, we were kept out of the way. And so I felt like an outsider for a very long time in the civil service, being what I would call a specialist economist. And I thought that's what you needed to do to be running the economy. And like I would expect someone in defence to have quite a lot of knowledge of defence. There is a role for generalists, and I think there's a really bigger role for people that come in with specialist skills to then transfer across. So for me, it was like, actually, economics is something I've got, but there's far more to it in doing policy. You have to understand the politics, you have to understand everything else. So put the two together, and you've got some really good things. And I've always said this, the economists were like Japanese knotweed. We were like, yeah, we'll go everywhere. We don't care, right? We'll get in. Whereas if you talk to, and I've just been talking to the chief scientist about this, the scientists are much more reserved. They're much more, this is our scientific expertise. You get in there and get grubby, like I used to say to my economists, you have to be professional, but you also have to be persuasive, and you have to do both. It's no use giving them the right advice if no one listens to you. So there's a mix there. So I think yes to much more specific skills, but we need to build on it, because ultimately, if you're a complete expert in one subject and you don't understand the person at the top who's a politician who may just have arrived, then you're not going to succeed. So it's that mix that's right, that needs to be there.
Yeah, I profoundly agree with that. I think the other thing is, so there's two problems with the traditional generalist model. One is that kind of sense of people who have no idea about the domain that they're working in it. And the other is that we didn't sufficiently see policy as something that you could learn, be trained in, and should be disciplined about acquiring. And those policy skills are real. They're specialists, they're teachable, and Tamara and I kind of on the policy profession have spent some time kind of trying to get people to do more codification and be clearer and have much, much clearer expectations about what the training you should go through as an emerging policy professional is. But I think that there's a really interesting balance. So there's an excellent book which I recommend to everybody called Range, The Power of Generalists in an Increasingly Specialised World, by a man called David Epstein, I think no relation, who, I hope,
Your best pal?
And, sorry?
Your best pal?
It's terrifying.
Sorry.
But I don't think he'd have been that interested in me. But anyway, the thing about the book that is really interesting is that he talks about the power of combinations of specialists and generalists, and of that kind of sense that you need some T-shaped people. So some people who have a deep expertise, but have got the shoulders, they've got the ability to connect with other people. And I think actually one of the things we see in the civil service is we do still have people kind of roaming around being kind of very generalists. We've got a bit better at thinking about people's domain expertise. We're growing this sense of kind of more professional and functional communities. But I also think we've got to watch the countervailing risk, actually, that we have a whole load of people who we've sort of put in a professional or functional silo, and we don't train them, as you were describing with your economists, to connect outside that, to build the skills that allow you to be a really effective member of a multidisciplinary team. And again, the other thing we talked about a lot in the policy profession, I'll shut up so Tamara can do it because she does it better than I do, is, one of your professional skills as a policy professional is convening the right multidisciplinary team around your problem, which consists of people with the right specialist skills to help you. And that'll be a different group depending on what the problem is, and you'll need to deploy and use them differently. And that, I think, is really important. Tamara?
Totally agree on that. I was one of the beneficiaries of Gus's campaign that economists should get around like Japanese knotweed. Starting as an economist in the Treasury. Partly I feel very passionately that the generalist label and identity is an absolute fiasco for the civil service, because it has become an excuse to just not be skilled and trained in anything. And the level of training and what we expect of people has dissipated over time in an absolutely shocking way. And so, you know, one of the things that we worked on was that everyone ought to declare for a profession. Yeah. And that should then make them connected to a framework of learning. And some of that might be domain knowledge, but a lot of that is actually generalist skills. But you should be professional at those skills. And at the moment, people are sitting outside any profession, not being skilled up in their early career, and then not doing continuous professional development in their later career, and it's not acceptable. And that absolutely has to shift. Our capability has become really poor as a result. And you know, we need to look at that individual capability and actually sort of team and profession capability. One of the things that we did in the policy profession was have a policy version of capability reviews, which Gus was sort of talking about did more broadly, you know, one of which showed, you know, the analytical expertise of policy professionals was poor, and then you could tackle that. So I think that's absolutely key. So it's then quite interesting, what do you do about the correct kind of criticism? People don't stay long enough, they don't build their domain knowledge. What do you do about that? Because you also want people to pick up those broader skills. So one of the things that we've been testing out is saying, well, look, take climate and environment. If you get people to develop their knowledge and understanding with some good training, but actually you could work in a range of different departments. You could work on a bill, you could work in private office, you could do a whole range of things, but all the time in climate and environment, build your networks in that area. So we were trying that out as a sort of sub-professions within policy to get people to be able to move around and yet build those skills. And I think that there's a route from that. But finally, I mean, it is what Susan said. I do think one of the important skills is how you put together a multidisciplinary team. I feel that policy people in particular need to know how you look at a policy problem and say, what do I need to solve this problem in terms of the set of skills and people? And my frustration is that often we go out to a management consultancy, strategy consultancy, and we say, we've got this problem, how do we solve it? In 48 hours, they will go, right, we need a scientist, we need someone, we need a data analyst. They put that together because their money depends on it. So they can do that and cost it up within 48 hours. We don't teach people to do that, and you need to be able to do that for every policy problem you get given. So that's one of those generalist skills that as a professional policy person you need to understand how to do. We need to teach people how to do it.
I might add a brief thing to that. I agree, and in my day I was trying to get this idea of clusters. You might work in the Treasury, Department of Business, and you might be in education, health. You might think there's a cluster that'd be foreign policy and security, and that's where your domain was. But it could be shifted around departments and multidisciplinary. I completely get. I mean, not having a national skills school of government has been a real disaster. And curiously enough, Bernard Jenkins, there's an unlikely ally, very strongly agrees with me about the state thing and bring back the National School of Government, but with this being for civil servants and MPs and ministers and working together, not just for civil servants. And I think that's absolutely crucial. And the one thing I'd rather say is multidisciplinary teams, but remember, it's not just about disciplines as well. The thing that I think was really, really important in Treasury when we were getting things was having the people that actually did the delivery. In our case, it was HMRC. Getting them in the room when you're formulating the policy, as opposed to formulate the policy, then say, can you deliver this? I think that's really crucial.
We've three pillars in the policy profession: strategy, democracy and delivery. Because if your policy doesn't have any delivery, it's just a paper.
And one of the times we learnt to do this, in COVID and in Brexit, I think certainly I would say from DEFRA's point of view, we got so much better at seeing policy through to delivery because it was essential. And someone was asking, you know, sort of, what do I sort of regret or big mistake, or one of those kind of questions. And I was like, actually really holding on to that way in which we saw policy through delivery that you do in wartime, and then you somehow lose and get more flabby about it in peacetime. And I think we learnt that because you couldn't do it. You had to kind of, you know, get some sort of, you know, payment system up and running in 10 days, which we did on something. And you did it by really seeing policy straight through delivery working together. And we're not as good at doing that in the kind of day-to-day as we ought to be.
So that's a very nice segue into the next issue that I want to touch upon, which is pay and staff. So that is one of the things you want to keep hold of from the COVID experience. One of the other questions from that period is, if you go back to I looked this up this morning, if you go back to 2015, i.e. pre-Brexit referendum, which we know induced certain consequences, and pre-COVID, the numbers in the civil service are about 370, 380,000. We're now well over 500,000. What's the story? Why haven't we gone back to those pre-Brexit, pre-COVID numbers, which were one-off events and obviously had one-off needs for resource? So that's the question on that side. Let me connect it to the pay question. I mean, when you look at it outside in, as I do from time to time, it's pretty clear that the relativities on pay compared to certain obvious private sector comparisons are not great. And just to pick up what you touched on, Gus, I mean, I'm not a civil servant and I don't have an ambition to be one, so I can say it. You might need to be more diplomatic. My own instinct on this is that we don't pay certainly the top section of civil service enough, anywhere near enough, and it needs to go up. But we probably need to have a conversation about whether we've got too many people.
So, can I do your second question and let them, because I'm not being, I don't know why we've got so many, and I'll let them answer. Pay. I thought you'd like this, Ed. So, the CEO of Ofcom gets paid £357,000.
Not in my day.
No, not in your day, but they do now. And the Cabinet Secretary, 200,000, right? You know. And just to be clear, so when I was Cabinet Secretary, which is, you know, like in the dark ages, I was paid 235,000, right? That shows you how much worse the whole thing's got. Senior civil servants, basically real terms pay has gone down by 25%, right? The pay system, you know, I pushed very hard to get more as a Cabinet Secretary, mainly so I could get more room for all the other grades to come up, right? It's terrible, right? The pay thing is just wrong. The relativities are wrong. You can understand why really good people in the civil service go off and run bloody regulators, you know, because they're going to get paid a lot more. Whereas, you know, doing tough jobs like Cabinet Secretary, might be biased in this, you know, get relative peanuts. Also the structure, right? I have said this many, many times. It is ridiculous as an economist to pay people most when they've retired. Yeah. This is bonkers, right? So we have got to increase the pay and, dare I say it, reduce the pensions, because if you're trying to get a mortgage like my daughter, you know, you have to tell them what your pay is. They're not interested in your pension, and it's bonkers. And the reason we don't do it is because some stupid accounting rules, which I could go into, which would bore you all, were rigid. But anyway, we don't do it. I put it to various chancellors. It's a total slam dunk, straightforward thing we should do, which is fiscally sensible, and yet I can't get any chancellor to do it. It's mad. So the pay thing is a massive problem, and what happens is you get people like, you know, my daughter with a bank of mum and dad who are fine. They're going to stay in, and the people that remain are going to be those that for one reason or another can't go outside, or are massive public sector ethos, thank you all, or they've got, you know, independent wealth. But really good people come from really poor backgrounds. They're trying to get a flat in London and want to start a family,
Can't do it.
You know, go and work for bloody JP Morgan. Ugh.
I thought we had longer than we have, and I want to have at least time for a couple of quick questions. So you don't need to answer on the pay, because I think we've dealt with that, maybe. But on the staff, what's the story on the numbers?
So one is that actually we could get smaller, but let me just give you, for DEFRA, right, 80% of what DEFRA does was affected by Brexit, and we suddenly had to do a whole load of things in here and in DEFRA that used to happen in the EU. So it wasn't a one-off. We suddenly had to run 6 different systems, a whole load of things, a new kind of a new system of farming papers, a whole load of things that we didn't have to do before. So some of it was that. And also there can be some interesting things. So we brought together our corporate services right across our group, including bodies which are outside the civil service. So all our corporate services count as civil servants now that previously didn't, but we're saving £150 million a year. So sometimes the numbers aren't telling the story that you think there are. So that is an aspect. But having said that, we have grown in a way that that isn't fully justified, and we definitely have to be looking at ways in which we get smaller, and it is doable. I think there's been, partly because of the pay issue, there's been grade inflation, and sometimes those, we've got large numbers of people because people just sort of add people because they aren't getting the skills that they need at the level that they have. So there are a whole range of ways. I think there'll be a range of ways in which to tackle it. I'll let Susan add to that as well. But I did want, on the pay thing, I just wanted to say, because I've heard Gus say this, and I absolutely get it, paying more and the balance between pensions and pay. I think it will be unacceptable to the public to pay civil servants more. And I wish that wasn't the case, but I think it is going to be unacceptable. So I do think we're going to have to find other ways as well. And one that I really feel passionately we should be thinking about is sabbaticals. At senior levels, whether we should be enabling people to earn effectively sabbatical time as a sort of way of keeping people in, giving people time to refresh. It's what many of the management consultancies do. And, again, it would cause a bit of a kind of Daily Mail story for 2 days. But I think we're going to need to think of cleverer ways in which to increase compensation that isn't about pay. And I know that's really not what people want to hear, but I cannot see it being socially acceptable to the public to increase by significant amounts to make the difference that you're describing.
Susan, I'm going to spare you just because in case people have got any burning, urgent questions, because we are slightly short of time. Yep. Well, there's quite a few, right? Okay.
There's another panel going on about Tesla and Grow at the moment. If we think that's a good idea, that feels like a very different way of intersecting policy and delivery. So I wonder what you reflect on that.
On what?
So can you repeat it?
Test
and learn growth. Right. Susan, why don't you pick that up?
Yes, I think it's a great way of doing things, and I think it squares that kind of eternal conundrum of how you make sure your evidence your policy is evidence-based without having more pilots than British Airways. And we're trying to use that wherever we can. Ironically, it tends to be easier to do good things like that in areas that are less in the spotlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because ministers tend to kind of want you to do the full fat thing as fast as humanly possible, and actually if you're slightly out of the spotlight, it's a bit easier to be more experimental.
Quick one from here as well.
My question was about incentive mechanisms, so Tesla and Grow being one of them, but also like missions require collaboration, therefore they require civil servants to work on things that aren't their Secretary of State's priority. Yeah. They require civil servants to look outwards and work with business, civil society, etc. So how do you incentivize? What's getting in the way if you agree that those things need to happen, and how does that happen in the future of the civil service?
Tamara?
I'm a little bit unconvinced that there isn't an incentive to work on that. First of all, you've got to make it that buying the Secretary of State in as well into the mission, and it being their priority as well. And I actually think you do that. There's a sort of sense. And actually, I don't know, Susan, you might not agree, because you said actually it's quite good to be kind of liberated from the Cabinet Office, get on with it in the department. But I actually think there's something quite important, a strong centre, number 10, Treasury together, helping with the trade-offs. Because the reason people don't do things is not because they want to sort of not deliver the outcome, is because there are trade-offs and they want to feel those are owned. So, if there is a trade-off of what you achieve on the environment and whether you meet your environment targets, not that there needs to be, but you want someone to go, yes, I get that, and as a government, as a whole, we own that. So I think having a strong centre is actually some of the most important ways in which you deliver it.
Yeah, I'd say it does help when the centre are pushing, but you shouldn't rely on it.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things. There's something about how you help people see the bigger or longer term or more joined up incentive. So keep bringing people back to, what does this feel like for the citizen? Because fundamentally they don't divide their lives up into the sort of individual goals that we set at departmental level. So if you can ask yourself the question again and again and again, well, if there is a trade-off, where in this would the citizen sit? And often there isn't quite such a straight trade-off. And actually, I think government's got quite good mechanics for dealing with, Department X thinks black and Department Y thinks white. Actually, sort of the Cabinet Office structures and so on are quite good at feeding pure disagreement through into a conclusion. And usually, if the disagreement is pure, the advantage is that the decision is relatively pure too. Like, we're either going to do it or not going to do it. I think the thing we struggle with most is something that everyone feels sort of broadly well disposed to, but is priority 1 for one department and priority 750 for the other department. And then you get these you get stuck in, I bet all of you have had a version of all of you who are civil service has a version of this conversation, where you go to the meeting and the person says, oh, I'd love to help you, and that sounds great, but I just don't think it's quite going to get to the top of the priority list, or I'm not quite going to have time, or, and again, the solution to that is really trying to find a way of thinking about it in a citizen-centred way. So it might be number 750 on my department's goals, but where does it stack up into citizens' priorities?
Look, quick last word, technology is going to be a big part of the future.
Massive part of the future. How we use data, AI and all of that. And I'm doing a report, can I give a plug, for the Global Government Forum, where I've interviewed a number of Permanent Secretaries, including Susan, who was incredibly helpful on this, just to understand what are the things that could make a huge difference to delivery of public services and to the way in which we operate. And I think that is going to be a massive opportunity for all of us.
Possibly.
Great. Please thank our guests and contributors.